Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Barnard. My name is Katie Glasner, and I'm the chair of the dance department. I'm so glad to see you here this evening, and I'm really very grateful to Gabri Krista, who has spearheaded this particular event with Dance NYC. This is a first ever for the department, and I hope the beginning of many conversations about dance in all its permutations, artists, and art making. Again, we're very glad to host this event. We share with Dance NYC a commitment to usability and the meaningful integration of disabled artists and audiences. And at no time has dance been more important, art been more important than right now. We have an uncertain landscape in front of us, politically, and dancers and dance makers, art makers, are perfectly comfortable in uncertain territories. This is not new to have shifting ground underneath us, around us. Thank you to the panelists this evening. Thank you to Tricia Tolliver, the department's technical director, and also to IMATS. The dance department at Barnard College is housed in this lovely open space. If you can imagine, 5 or 6 years ago, this space was 2 spaces honoring an architecture studio and a painting studio. We've broken down the walls and created a large dance studio. I imagine that a number of walls will be broken down tonight as well. Along with Dance NYC, the Barnard Dance Department and Barnard College work towards creating an equitable ecosystem requiring collaboration and networks like the one we are helping Dance NYC build this evening with this particular event. Again, I thank you for being here. Welcome to the panelists. And Lane, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie, and really the whole team here at Barnard College. I'm Lane Harwell, Executive Director of Dance NYC, and I'm delighted to welcome you all this evening. Tonight, as you know, it's about disability and it's about national synergies in dance. The event is the culmination of an International Voices series that furthers Dance NYC's commitment to a cultural ecosystem that expressly and equitably includes disabled artists. The series builds on pioneering research, on convening, and on coalition building Dance NYC has undertaken these past 3 years. And it puts the learning we've done on the ground in conversation with both national and international voices. So the work, it's both local and it's global. And it coincides with a national initiative and a set of convening across the United States undertaken by Axis Dance Company with the support of the national service organization Dance USA. Dance NYC works in alliance with Dance USA. And we are particularly pleased to have with us this evening Judith Smith of Access Dance Company to share her learning and explore pathways forward. As Katie mentioned, this work is particularly important this week when disabled artists and the work of disabled artists gains urgency and heightened meaning. I have many partners and friends to thank for making tonight possible, in particular the project's funders, including the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the City of New York, and the State of New York, both of which are represented here tonight. I thank the volunteers and the staff. I thank Gabri again. I thank our consultant, Ann Coates, our programs manager, Alejandra Duca-Cifuentes, and our equity and inclusion coordinator, Jay Soto. I thank our Disability Dance Artistry Task Force that's been with us every step of the journey. And above all, our board member, Alice Shepard, and our moderator tonight, Simi Linton, for curating the series and all they do to move our work forward. Tonight we celebrate you. A few logistical notes before I introduce Simi. First, you are being photographed and videotaped tonight for archival purposes. Second, you can help us extend the conversation in this room online on Twitter using the handle @DanceNYC and the hashtags Town Hall and DDA Voices. Third, you can learn more about tonight's panelists and the event series on Dance NYC's website. Please visit dance.nyc/DDA bios and dance.nyc/DDA series. This is also where archival videos will live. The event tonight will consist of a conversation with Judith Smith of Axis Dance Company and Alice Shepard, moderated by Simi Linton, followed by a question and answer session. If you have questions during the session, we will invite you to line up at a microphone. I believe it will be this microphone, which will be in the aisle. Or, if you prefer, please send your questions by email to ddatownhall@dance.nyc, and a member of our team will try to put the question to our moderators. So with those few notes, or those many notes, it is my honor to introduce our moderator this evening, Simi Linton. And Simi Linton is coming to us from Disability Arts Consultancy and many other places, including the documentary film Invitation to Dance, which she directed and produced with Christian von Tippelskirch. She is also the author of numerous publications on disability. I've come to know Simi through her involvement with Dance NYC's task force. She is also a colleague of mine on the New York City Cultural Affairs Advisory Commission, where we're working together to ensure that disability is part of the city's equity agenda. She also, and this is important, she also recently established and is the co-director of Disability Arts NYC, a task force that is in the near term focused on the role of disability in cultural planning for the city of New York. I'm really honored to be a member of that group. I'm honored to know and work with Simi. And I really couldn't think of a better friend and partner to have in this work. I give you to Simi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We're just going to do some shifting here. Let me move up a bit. I can't see my friends. I want to see my friends. How's that? Okay, good. Then you can position that for me. I'll move this way, too. Okay. How's that, everybody? Hello, and thank you. Thank you, Lane. I would like to take this moment to make Lane blush. No, he says. Lane has become a cherished and dear friend and colleague over the last couple of years. Alice and I, who don't do diddly squat for most people, will answer his calls anytime, answer his emails, because we believe so strongly, I'll speak just for myself, because I believe so strongly in his leadership in disability and arts, and disability and dance in particular. It is a great honor, and this is the fourth of the Town Hall series. I started to say last, but I'm not going to say that.
For now. Because Lane continually thinks about ways to bring this topic to a broader public, and that is very exciting. And I think this is an important cultural moment for us all. It is an opportunity to talk back and fight back
against powers that have historically suppressed disabled people pursuing careers in the arts, and has assumed a new urgency in the recent political climate that is upon us. So thank you, Lane, for this wonderful opportunity and for this conversation and for bringing my dear friends to this room. And thank you, Alejandra and Jay and all the rest who make this so wonderfully easy to do. So this is, I believe, an important cultural moment in disability arts, and one that is important to mark and one that is important to live in at the moment in a conscious and conscientious way, so that we can look forward to a new, we can look forward to a frontier that is scripted in our own image, with our voices, with the kind of authority that my friends on this panel bring to the subject matter. I assume the role of moderator gladly, although I think that moderator might not be the apt description for the job that I am tasked with here. So I will attempt to moderate, but I hope that more than that, I hope to provoke. So here we go. To my far left are these wonderful interpreters. Next to them is Judith Smith, Artistic Director of Access Dance. And to my near left is Alice Shepard, choreographer and dancer. You can read more extended bios and learn more about them online, and we urge you to do that. So, team, are you ready?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So our first question is, what do you think are indicators of recognition for this field of disability dance? And have you noticed a shift? And where have you noticed the shift? And either of you?
Well, I think the fact that we're in this room is a big indicator. I've been in the field for 30 years. And, you know, Access started at a time there was no internet. It was popping up, this form of dance was popping up all over the world, but none of us knew about it or knew each other. So I think the fact that we're able to be in a room together talking about disability and dance is a huge indicator. And I would say, kind of having grown up in the field and helped to grow the field, that, you know, this is the kind of momentum nationally, regionally, and locally that I've been waiting for all this time. And, you know, it's the steps that Dance NYC has taken to advance disability as part of equity, having Dance USA on board with our national and regional initiatives and their commitment to make disability part of their equity platform is, you know, it's huge.
On top of that, I want to see more of us on stage. Mm-hmm. I want the work that we do to be more widely known, to be written about, to be studied in universities, to be, you know, to be in the conversation of the field. And moreover, because I'm going to be picky about this, I want it to be written about and talked about in a particular kind of way. I want us to be able to be in a space where people are talking about the work for its artistic and aesthetic values, for any political and social messaging. I do not need to be in a space where, you know, we're still talking about the triumph over a disability, the despite, the overcoming, the inspiration, I mean, I don't really want to be in a conversation where we are talking about ability at all. I want to be talking about the work and how, you know, where the work fits in, doesn't fit in, what are the trends, trajectories. That is, I want a really robust critical language for the work, so that when you see it and it's talked about, it is talked about in ways that respect the work that we have done, but also open up possibilities of connection to the rest of the dance field and to artistic production in a variety of disciplines.
Great, and that leads very directly into our next question, which is, what are the sources of resistance to the work of disabled artists? And what I'm going to ask Alice and Judith to do is to go beyond what is typically discussed in response to this question, because it's been posed to each of us in different ways. What are the sources of resistance? And typically we'll say that disabled dancers are seen to be engaged in some kind of therapeutic endeavor, or that disability dance is some kind of a gimmick, or that it's enlightening, or, of course, the fallback, inspirational. And I think that we can take our discourse beyond those responses to think where else the resistances lie and what we can do to try to reveal them and to try to attack them, if you will.
Multiple places. So when I think about the first sort of resistance, I think about fear, and to change the narrative slightly, one of the things that we often say among ourselves about fear is that people are scared of disability because they might one day end up disabled. I'm not sure that that's entirely it. I'm not sure that's it at all. I think that the fear and resistance are located in part in that moment where, it's not going to be good, or I'm going to be uncomfortable, or I'm going to have to reevaluate something that I thought, or I'm going to have to do a kind of questioning. There's a kind of a way in which all of those are intersecting and influencing of each other. So I start with fear, but perhaps not fear as we usually talk about it among ourselves.
And fear, we can talk about that too, and you may want to comment on that too, Judith, but I think also within the world of dance, what are the fears that exist among practitioners and professionals in the world of dance? What kinds of fears emerge for them when confronted with the kind of work that we do? You do. Mm-hmm. Judith, go ahead.
Well, on just the subject of fear, dancers, we use our bodies, mm-hmm. and there's always a fear of injury, mm-hmm. and what that is going to mean, for a dancer. And so I think we those of us who are dancing and who are disabled kind of reflect that. But I think another huge source of resistance is this kind of narrow view that we have of virtuosity. Mm-hmm. And I think that really limits. And if you think of Judson Church and what they were trying to do and say about virtuosity, so this conversation's been going on for a long, long time. And when you bring disabled dancers and very, very different kinds of physicality into the equation, the way that we contextualize or define virtuosity necessarily has to shift. Mm. And I think there's a resistance to that because, there's, truly a real lack of awareness about this form of dance, about dancers with disabilities. We're not infiltrating into the university systems. There aren't lots of disabled kids in, studios that offer entry points for kids to dance. So I think a huge resistance is around having to look at and redefine virtuosity.
Mm-hmm. Which is particularly key I think, because of the association that people make between virtuosity and extreme raw physical ability. That, you know, the idea of making certain lines, being able to perform certain moves, it works in concert with a culture that defines disability as the absence of physical ability. And so the two of those things, again, intersect and inform each other. Whereas if you're thinking about disability as an aesthetic, a culture, a practice, not to say that there isn't a very lived material reality, but that the disability can be an aesthetic in its own right and a way of thinking about movement and movement analysis, you know, then you have a different kind of conversation going on around, you know, virtuosity and ability and disability. And I don't know that we've made that shift. If you look at cultural criticism, dance criticism, the vocabulary of dance, I mean, if you ask someone who you know, do they dance? The very first thing they say is, no, I couldn't do it, my body won't do that, as if they were, you know, with reference to this rigid structure. Whereas you might ask the question differently, you know, can you communicate in movement? Can you express in movement? And that might, under some circumstances, the ability to do that might make you a dancer. So, I mean, it's about how we frame the questions and then what kind of interpretive categories we put around them.
Yeah, and you know, there was kind of an interesting thing that happened. You know, for Access, I think the first 10 years we really were trying to convince people that we were doing dance and not therapy. And it was very hard for critics, and I think still is, difficult for critics to write about this kind of work. And I think when that shifted for Access as a company was when we started commissioning choreographers, because all of a sudden there was a context. So they could review Access work, you know, based on what they knew about Bill T. Jones' work or Joe Good's work or Sonia Delwaite's work. And so I think, you know, we have to find a way as a field to provide context, and to provide ways for people to get context. And I think that does go back to, you know, awareness of this field, awareness, you know, that this is even possible, that, you know, disabled people would want to dance, that non-disabled people would want to dance with disabled people. You know, just even that awareness, because the truth is that, you know, and what's kept me so fascinated about this work is the endless possibilities, because when you combine people who move very differently and in very, very different bodies, you get a hugely expanded vocabulary of movement and, you know, way more possibilities than you would have, you know, if it was just a company of all people in wheelchairs or a company of all people on feet, you know. So I just think there's still something that we're really missing in terms of awareness and in terms of really infiltrating, you know, from the entry point level all the way up to the university level.
Agreed. And, or slightly differently, I mean, the question was also about resistances. You know, that kind of thing that Judy's been talking about has left, you know, structures the field in a certain way, right? The field, you know, everyone is in their own little, like, survival mode, still trying, you know, proving the work, proving themselves, proving this, that, and the other. And, you know, that kind of conversation, it doesn't always mean that you get to work as a field. So in some ways, part of it is on us to, now that we're 30 years in, you know, begin to take a step back and show the bodies of work, the conversations, the interactions, the way the work sets up a field that has its own dynamism, its own tough points, you know, and its own, you know, difficulties, its own mistakes, its own less than well-chosen directions, its own prejudices. I mean, this is what it means to have a healthy field. And, you know, it's on us to, sadly, push back against the narrative of survival and proof of worthiness, and to make available a second sound of conversation, which is evaluation by the work itself, and the hopes and aspirations, the trainings, the larger good, the larger practices that we take upon ourselves.
And thank you. We discussed on the phone that we decided that we were in the third wave of disability dance. And without going back and looking at, or describing what the first two were, I think that it's safe to say that one of the things that marks this third wave is its potential to have an impact on the field of dance. I think we've seen that in women's studies, we've seen that in disability studies, in academic domains where it went beyond, oh, well, those women's studies people can go off and study their texts and do this and do that, but it was when the readings of those texts started to call into question the way everything else was taught, that the real pushback came. And I think that that's where we're at right now, because we are saying not only, we're here, get used to us, we're saying we're here and we want you to re-examine what you do.
And we have something to offer.
And we have something to
that
offer.
Can't be offered otherwise.
Right. So if we think about this as the third wave, what kinds of ideas drive this new wave, and what trends are we setting, and what can practitioners who do this work do to influence others in the field? So that's a heady question, but take any piece of that you'd like.
Well, I would love for us to, us internally in the field, to have a moment where we, maybe internally and privately, but perhaps also publicly, tussle out some stuff. And we've been doing that in these town halls, both with regard to training and education, and when we're talking about education in the university and conservatory education for disabled dancers, one strand of thought was that physically integrated dance might be separate from disability dance, and that neither track of the field, a disabled dancer might want to choose either one or both, but neither track may be best arrived at through a conservatory education. So, partly what we're thinking about is, by insisting on our presence and right to be there as equal participants in the field of dance, is that the things that people think of as fundamental, there's invisible things, the things that you say, well, it's always been done that way. Why do we do it that way? Well, yes, there is a reason, but maybe we don't have to do it that way. Maybe there are other reasons. And that the inclusion and presence of disabled dancers, if you think about different ways of learning, different embodiments, different movement practices, these all challenge the things that dance has done sort of automatically, and also consciously and intentionally. And so that's part of what's going on. And I think that might be part of that third wave.
Well, it's interesting because I guess it was almost 10 years ago, I had a discussion with Victoria Marks about, having a university program that was, a degree in integrated dance. She said, you don't want to be in the university. They're too conservative. And now, 10 years later, the past couple years, she's been teaching a dance and disability class, and she's, more committed to happening at the university level. And I do feel like it, it needs to happen at a lot of different levels. Back in 1998, when we worked with Bill T., he said, you all need an academy. You need a place in the world where people can go train when it's convenient for them.
Nice.
You need an academy, and so 20 years later, we still don't have our academy, but we're talking about it, and we're trying to figure out ways to, develop platforms for training. There's just still such a pathetically small number of dancers with disabilities, and such a pathetically small number of opportunities. And that's a problem.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when Alice was saying that, some say that possibly conservatory training is not the way to go. And of course, the answer to that dilemma is dependent on what kind of conservatory training. It may not be the way to go because the conservatory training may not really train disabled dancers in a way that's useful and meaningful, or is it that it's too conservative? That's not the word I'm looking for. It's too conservative, and therefore not conducive. It's too conservative in general, and therefore not conducive to the kind of work that disabled dancers want to do.
Well, I think that's up to the dancer. And so they need to, we need to have the opportunity to say, I want to go to a university. And I know a lot of disabled dancers who have made it through a university, and they've usually done it kicking and screaming their way in, and they've usually had at least one professor who's gotten behind them and really mentored them. Has it worked fantastically for them? Most of them, no. Yeah. So I think it's important that, we have a conservatory, that we have university programs, that we have studios. I think one of the great things that, has happened with us, with Axis, as far as commissioning choreographers and bringing them in and bringing in guests to teach master classes and doing residencies at Maggie Allisey National Center for Choreography, is that every time we get to work with somebody, they go out with a body of knowledge that most of them didn't have before because they had never worked with a company like us. And they go out with a different level of comfort. And I think what's been most exciting is that they all get hooked on it and get hooked on the idea of it. So, it's, there's just nothing better than one-on-one being in a studio,
To add, to double back on something that you said, I also want to see us in this third wave work out publicly, what are we talking about when we talk about disability in the work and disability at large, and we've mentioned it as part of an equity and diversity. What does that actually mean? We had a first town hall around, disability in the dance. How do we talk about disability more than, a disabled dancer has to be present, or, a disabled dancer is present, happens to be disabled. What is the value of disability? How does it intersect with other identity categories? What are the political and social meanings? The first wave, in theory, tells the story. Sometimes a lived experience, that kind of what happened to me, or something that did happen to me, or the way I live. But, beyond that, disability is a richly sophisticated analytical category. And, we can talk about disability in the work in a variety of ways. And the sophistication and nuance of that conversation is no less or more than any of the other identity groups. And, that's also part of this third wave, is to encourage, exhort, deepen public knowledge, field knowledge and awareness and participation in this language.
Yeah, the crux often gets down to this idea of not what disabled dancers can do despite their impairment, but what disabled dancers do with impairment. And that, that's I think where the nexus, for me lies, the shifting of that idea of what impairment brings to the situation and what disability as a category of analysis, as Alice was talking about, brings to the situation. How do we use disability as a lens through which we can look at all of dance practice? A dancer who is no longer with us, but many of us knew, Homer Avila, talked about the way that in his pre-disability dance training, everything he was taught had to do with reducing any little quirks and tics of his body to non-entities, so that he was somehow this pure body and this pure dancer. And what we are asking all dancers to do is to consider what those quirks and tics and configurations of body do bring to the stage, bring to the moment. And I think that's part of this third wave. It's something we've known for a long, long time, but something that now we're introducing to dance education. So we have a number of dance educators here from a variety of different institutions. If you were to address them, what might you say about the admissions practices, the faculty selection practices, the curriculum in dance programs that you note that need to be shaken up, that need to be thought about?
The list seems long.
Yeah. Start anywhere.
Wow, I mean, this is carte blanche. So to welcome difference of body and mind, to allow the expression of those differences to be present in your class, studio, student body, faculty, and thinkings and writings and practices around dance, actively and not just sort of incidentally. Yeah. I mean, otherwise I'm going to give you a laundry list by bullet point, by bullet point, by bullet point. But I think that covers the general. Get out there and do it. We're here, and there are more of us around than you know. It's not just the same concert of faces. Yeah.
I think that's one of the great things that I've had the opportunity doing these regional. They're kind of like town halls, one-day regional convenings. Is that there's 30 to 60 people in the room who are all have a similar interest or some investment in this work, who never knew each other, hadn't had the opportunity to really get together. And the national convening was the first time we as a field have even gotten together to start unearthing these ideas and exploring them. So, I think just there are a lot of people, around the country that I didn't know. Even as connected as I feel like I sometimes am. And so I think that's just important is, how do we keep finding ways to make connections and to find those kids in the middle of the country, and to find adults who are, coming to dance later in life. So I don't, in terms of what to say to educators, I think definitely you have to start with an open mind about it. There are going to be some choreographers and some educators who this just does not interest. It's not in their wheelhouse. They don't want it to be in their wheelhouse. And so, I think that's a reality. And so we have to start with the people who are interested, and finding those people and finding those educators and those people who want to talk about it and who want to work in the field, work with the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not our job, it's not our work to break down those resistances.
See, and I disagree. I think it is our work.
Of the people that you were saying show no interest, and I've put up those barriers. So you would like to go in deep.
Oh, no, there are people that I just, there's certain choreographers who, I happen to know I'm just never going to approach. Because
Yeah, no, that's what I mean.
they're-
That's what
no,
I mean.
no,
Yeah.
I'm not going to, I don't want to force people,
Yeah.
because that doesn't, it doesn't work for one thing. And, people have to come to different ideas about many, many things, and we have to come to them in our own way.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I do feel, that it is, unfortunately, I wish it wasn't because I'm kind of tired, but it is on us to keep, pounding on the doors and, getting the ramps built and that kind of thing.
Yeah. That said, though, I also want to just sort of add to that. It is on us, and it also isn't on us. I mean, I think queer communities, communities of color, feminist communities, all acknowledge that the burdens of that kind of labor and the way that wears at burnout. And the way that kind of constant self, or field proving or work proving, that takes a large toll, and it's an extra and added a burden above and beyond the difficulties of doing the work, running a company, making work, being a dancer, training. If you're constantly proving all of this, there has to be another way to, it can't be us alone. And, I feel kind of conflicted about saying, yes, it is on us because it is on us. We are the ones who know this and have the knowledge and the expertise. Mm-hmm. But also the expectation that it is on us is where I think I want to push back slightly.
Yeah, I think what I was responding to is this idea that for those who put up such clear resistance and negativity, it's my inclination to just let them go and work with the people who are willing to come halfway.
I do have a story about that.
Ah, well, we'll hear it in a second. Ultimately, what's on us is to do good work. And I think that's the strongest tool that we have.
Absolutely.
If we can work with those who are ready to come, meet us in common ground and with passion and interest, then we're more likely to do good work, and then let those others just go in the corner and suck their thumbs. I don't care. It's really, it's up to us to an extent, but I don't think it's up to us to completely twist ourselves and turn ourselves into the people that badger those who are not ready.
But I do have a fun story. There is a certain critic in San Francisco, a dance critic, and back in, I think it was around '96, we were performing in the East Bay Dance Festival, and our presenter, who is a friend of mine, contacted said critic and invited him to come to the show. He said, I'm never going to come see them. They don't do dance. I don't think what they do dance, and no, I'm not going. Mm-hmm. And so I guess it was probably about 7 years later, he got shamed into coming to a show that we were doing at Yerba Buena Center of the Arts. We were sharing it with Victoria Marks. She hadn't been in the Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And he got shamed into coming to see her work. Mm-hmm. And he ended up kind of liking some of what we were doing. And now he comes to everything we do. And, in I guess it was our 20th anniversary season, he wrote a preview article, and he kind of owned up to the fact that, he was one of those naysayers. And so, minds can change, and it takes the time that it takes. And, sometimes people get weary of having to, carry that torch and run with it and beat down the doors, and then you just go in the studio and you do your work, and you get regenerized, and you come back out when you're ready to come back out and carry the torch again, or you don't.
And some critics will never get it.
No, they won't.
And certain critic named Arlene Croce never got it. But we think somehow Bill T. Jones has kind of done okay for himself despite that. So
yeah.
I think the way is to just do keep trying to do the work and to do it well and to do it with vigor, and then let people come to it in the best way they can. Okay.
Well, and I think that's somewhat where the resistance is. And Alice brought this up, is the work going to be good? And that's where not having opportunities to train, not having opportunities to get funding for your work, that's kind of a crux to the problem, is it's hard to do good work if you don't have access to training, if you don't have access to funding. I used to show jumping horses, and I was always riding against people that were better than me, because that's how you get good. And so that's kind of where the beating down the door still has to happen, because those opportunities are not still there. And the work needs to be able to, air quotes, stand on its own. And it needs to be, it's kind of like women trying to break the glass ceiling. It's like you have to do twice as much in high heels.
Backwards.
And that's just something that, we're still obviously facing on a lot of different levels in this country. So those of us in the field that have the energy and can, Dance NYC is taking this on through, their new funding platform. We have to keep doing the work just to get the opportunity, to get training, and to get our work shown, and to get critical feedback on it, and to keep increasing the artistic vigor of the work, the vigor and the rigor.
Yeah, and that criticism is often an issue, because I think critics, have gone from dismissing it to being afraid to be really critical of it. It seems to me to be reluctant to enter into to feel maybe that they don't understand it well enough to know how to criticize the work.
That's part of what we want to do. In addition to what Judith's saying, I also want to see us change the notion of good, or at least to broaden our public awareness about what good might look like. Would be a more careful way of putting it. Just stretch.
Yeah.
Just stretch what good is. It's such a.
And I think that's the idea of stretching what virtuosity is.
Right.
Yeah. And at the same time, we live in such a culture that, only wants action movies. So it's hard to challenge those 2-minute sound bites, and it used to be pretty standard that, most of us did hour and 45-minute to 2-hour shows, and most of us are now doing 60 to 75-minute shows because attention spans have changed. So, we're up against a lot of things that we're trying to find balance with.
So finding balance is helpful, but I also want to just, part of me has this semi-destructive streak that occasionally you get to, blow something up in a non-violent way. Occasionally you get to take things apart, and
absolutely, and that's definitely a choice that we each have as dance makers and dance doers.
Yeah. And having that choice and seeing those mistakes or not mistakes happen, I think heralds, back to your first question, something about the maturity of the field, right? Our field, the people who are engaging in this field are doing all kinds of different work with different takes on it. And that's an indicator to me of the richness and the maturity and the success of the field.
And it comes alongside the maturity and the kind of grip that disability studies is increasingly having in the academy. The ways that let's say, dissertation proposal is judged to be faulty or missing something because it doesn't have that perspective. In the same way, we would like to think that a dance curriculum that doesn't engage with a wide variety of presentations of self and types of bodies is found faulty and lacking in something. So that is, I think, part of the job of this third wave is to use disability as a tool to investigate what is missing in the big picture rather than focusing on what's missing in our bodies or what's faulty in our bodies. It's totally shifting the lens to look at the bigger picture and to consider what's missing in that picture. We're going to move in a very few minutes into questions, but I wonder if you might go back to some of the questions that we were engaging with along the way and consider what's marking this moment. How can we, as people who think about this all the time, do to mark this moment? What are we on the brink of? What are we capable of doing given opportunities and so forth and openness to it? What marks this moment for you?
Wow. A recognition, a different kind of listening, a different kind of recognition, a different kind of sensitivity, which permeates funding mechanisms, presenting mechanisms, educational mechanisms. It feels as if all of the work over the past 30 years is somehow, I don't know, arriving in a different way at a different time. It feels like this is a wave, and I hope it's not a wave that just sort of plops flat at the end. I mean, maybe it'll crest and keep going differently, but it feels like many of the things that have been really tough points earlier have changed, shifted, are changing and shifting in ways that we can now take advantage of the opportunity that is revealed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the dance field has a lot of challenges, when we think about it. I mean, and then you add, having a company that also has to look at accessibility issues and, and disability concerns, and add to that. So, we're living in kind of a difficult time, and, we're also, Access is operating in a system, a system of funding, and hopefully you get some touring if you're lucky, and touring is really down for most companies. So, it's pretty complicated, and I hope that in this third wave, the third generation doing this work, that we can find different models of success. It doesn't necessarily mean that, the only way you're going to survive, because ultimately we all have to pay rent or mortgages if we're fortunate enough, and we have to eat. So, you know, where we don't, you know, not a lot of us have that angel that's come down and dropped $1 million on us. So, you know, that we can just go out and randomly do what, well, not even randomly, but purposely, you know, do things that we think might fall flat. You know, so it's really hard in this system, which is a system, to be able to be afforded the luxury of making mistakes. And I don't know how we're going to change that as a field. But I hope that the third generation figures it out, because the first generation hasn't. You know, we're still having to pay our bills, and, you know, our systems have gotten, you know, our companies have gotten bigger. There's more mouths to feed. You know, there's less opportunity to take risks sometimes. So, you know, Access is trying to figure out, well, where can we take a risk? You know, where can we do something that might not work? So that's what I hope the third generation figures out, is what is a different system that will allow us to thrive and to flourish, and, you know, to take maybe chances that even a lot of contemporary companies and, you know, companies operating today don't feel like we have the ability to take.
Yeah, taking risks, taking a chance on things is a sign of the kind of stability of a field and a stability of a company. And that comes with the maturity both of the company and of the field, and also the willingness to do something that is disturbing and unsettling and scary, that you're putting out there, which is a risk that so many companies these days can't afford to do. You know, using music that isn't so pleasing, using bodies that aren't as comfortable and typical. There's a lot of different ways that this can disturb, and I don't mean disturbing in that way, but just disturbing an equanimity, a complacency that I look forward to our having the opportunity to do that, because it's an exciting moment. Okay, well, I have run out of the clock. My timekeeper isn't even showing it to me anymore, which means
Which means we're in trouble.
which means that it is time for us to move to questions, and we will have a mic here, and then we also have an email your questions right up on our screen here. It says ddatownhall@dance.nyc. So if you'd prefer to send in your questions, someone will be monitoring those, but we invite you to come up and
It's like, it's a personal agenda. And I'm not sure I should have brought it here, except that, you know, this is blocks from my house. But I'm blind. I don't have an interesting disabled body. You know, it's at this point a middle-aged body with not in the shape I want it to be in. But, so I don't have anything to offer on that end of being interesting. All I am is somebody who's a pain in the butt to have in a class. And if I want to study dance, I need the same dance education as somebody who's not disabled, because my body doesn't have a disability. I had a couple of years, you know, I came to dance as an adult, and that's a whole other issue, because you're talking about points of entry, mainly because I was turned away from classes when I was younger. And I found somebody, just happened to in my 50s for a couple of years, where I was able to take 16 hours of dance classes a week. And it was a level of intensity that I never thought I could have. And I want it again. Where do I go?
That is a huge question for so many people who
This
feel...
is exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Where do we
Who
go?
feel there's nowhere to go.
Find me afterwards. I can make some suggestions.
Find me afterwards.
Okay.
Or who may ask you, who are you? Who are the you that
I'm
finding?
Alice.
Who is
And
it?
I'm Alice, one of the
Alice.
speakers on the panel,
Okay.
and we'll connect afterwards.
Okay.
Terrific. Thank you.
So I guess, Judy, I'm in the first wave, I suppose. Older than dirt.
Exactly.
Yes, because we didn't have anyone. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have anyone to bounce ideas off of. We had to make it up as we went along. I didn't know that it wasn't okay to insert myself into a mainstream class because I had been a dancer prior to acquiring my injury, so that's what I did. And not everyone was thrilled about that. But that's what I did. And what I've learned in the 30 years and seeing more people becoming involved and teaching more people who are going to become involved in a bigger way is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We all have something. I mean, ballet technique has served the dance world for over 400 years. So there's something to be gained by looking to the past and incorporating that into a way that works for the particular body. But I also think that, and I know that you and I have been knocking on doors and beating bushes and talking about training for a very, very long time. But I also think that the time has come for dancers to also take some responsibility upon themselves for that and not wait until there is the ultimate academy of disabled dance and to go out and take a class. Put yourself into a class. Insert yourself into a class. Because as I've been listening to you all speak, it's not going to change. I doubt seriously that we, the three of us right now, are going to become chairs of university dance departments. I doubt that that would happen, you know?
No,
So,
running a dance company is
I
enough.
doubt that that would happen. So it's going to be a very long time until people feel comfortable. And as you are saying, Simi, going in and shaking it up and causing a disturbance, that how else can we do it? You and I have been saying the same thing for 30 years.
Yeah, but there
and it's shifting.
are more disabled dancers. I'm looking around the room
Yes.
at a number of them right now.
And they're
who are
younger.
out there and they're working and they're on stages. Maybe they're not getting paid very much or at all. Maybe they're not getting the kind of audiences that they might want. But there is an increase, and I think that is something. If we're going to mark this moment, I think that's something to mark.
And I think that that's the proof in the pudding, that there are more. There are more of us. Somehow, it's multiplying, and people are becoming aware. And as far as turning people's minds, yes, to see us is different than what their fantasy of being the Jerry Lewis telethon. But I think also that we've come to a place in time, I'm just going to say this for me personally, that we don't need the non-disabled dance world to validate us.
Well, I think we do, unfortunately. I think that
I agree.
without recognition by the larger dance world, we work in isolation. And I think that it is, we are actually now throwing it back at them and saying, what are you doing and what are you not doing?
And that's why I'm saying we're doing it without their validation. And if we keep doing it and we keep making better and better dance work, they'll either get it or they won't get it. You know? But we have to just keep making the work.
Well, maybe we can turn it back to the panelists and ask you folks to comment on that issue, and then we have another question in the third row.
So my questions are around the idea of, you talked about someone coming to critique the work, and so my question, thank you. So my question would be, so who are the people qualified to critique the work? What are the standards? In Dancers Without Disabilities, there's 400 years or whatever of standards built up. So what are the standards then, and who should be qualified? You who have been in the dance world as a disabled person for 30 years or whatever, you would be qualified. So why are you, like, who are the people that should be critiquing the work is what, you know? Like, I don't feel qualified to critique your work. Number one, I'm not a dancer, but as a dancer with disabilities, because maybe I don't understand the piece or I don't understand the movement. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Well, my first thought is, why aren't you?
Exactly.
It's movement.
Exactly.
It's just movement.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
So that would be my first response.
right.
And my second would maybe be a question back. What is your fear in coming and critiquing the work, you know? So what would be keeping you from?
From critiquing?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not a dancer, so I don't, like, even in the non-disabled dance world, I don't really feel qualified to critique the work either. I've just come to enjoy the performance.
Right.
But what if you don't enjoy it? You know, you've probably gone to a dance performance or a piece of theater that you didn't like so much.
Yeah.
Right.
One or two.
And so what qualifies you to comment on it is your experience as this is not my favorite word, but as a consumer, as a patron
As a
of the
patron.
arts, as someone who goes to performances. You have a critical perspective. You know what you like, you know what you don't like. You know what catches you, what grabs you, what you remember, and what you wish you could forget by the next morning. So,
But, I mean, sorry to interrupt, but actually not that sorry to interrupt. But, you know, there's a way in which there are two things going on, right? I mean, we can say, absolutely, I would invite you to come to a performance and respond, react to my work. I don't know if you would call that critiquing or not.
Responding, right, yes.
But I also think that there's a kind of a different thing that should go on at the same time. Anyone is welcome to respond, react to, and critique work. But I also want there to be a recognition of the availability of the work as it situates itself in context with regard to other pieces, other artistic production. And I understand how you or anyone else in this room may not feel equipped, ready, prepared, whatever to do that. But, you know, that's also true for going to the movies. Do you have the technique necessarily to recognize how something is shot? Others do. And there's a language around that. And there's a kind of film reference tradition. So we want both. But not having one doesn't necessarily invalidate you from the other unless you're going to make a living writing about dance.
Right. Well, I guess in response to what you said earlier about this particular critic in San Francisco that was going to write about your work, so for a person like me I'm not on the new staff, I'm not a writer, but I have an opinion about the work because I either enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it, or, you know, the elements about the work in context that I enjoyed or not. There's not a platform for me to, you know, put that out.
Oh, but there is. It's called buying a ticket.
Well, yes, I mean that,
Yeah.
but, you know, I'm one person, I can buy all the tickets I want, but,
Right.
you know, how does that promote your work as, you know, a body of work?
they mount up. You know, if there's more of you that buy the tickets, then
Right.
you get an audience, and then people come.
But then there's the education factor too, because I'm not educated in dance, so.
You know, that isn't the bellwether, that isn't the critical thing. When you show up at a performance, you bring maybe a guest, a friend, a partner. You maybe bring 2 or 3 people more the next time. You maybe take some pictures and stick them on Facebook, even though you shouldn't be photographing a dance performance, right? So, you know.
I don't do that.
Right.
You find a picture on the internet.
Right.
You maybe
Twitter,
tweet,
yeah.
right? So,
Okay.
don't underestimate the value of that.
Yeah.
But, you know, and this brings up this question again is, you know, why is it different for you to think about coming to a performance that might have, you know, a disabled dancer and feeling unqualified because you're not a dancer, but then you go to other performances, you know, so...
It's not that I wouldn't go, like I go to.
No, but I think that there's this kind of thing that happens that, you know, the disability factor makes it different somehow than just being a dance performance. And, you know, a lot of the choreographers that have come in to work with us, they don't really work with us that differently than they would any other company. So it's, I mean, that for me is the question. Why, you know, what is the difference? And I think it comes down to, you know, our whole social context about disability.
Yeah, we aren't fragile.
We're not there yet, folks.
Yeah. Okay, Krishna, you have a question.
Hi, everybody. I've been having a really great time listening to your thoughts. It's been wonderful. As someone who is still, I consider myself still nascent in my career, do you have any advice for me in regards to auditions and job interviews for teaching dance? Do you have any tips?
For teaching dance?
Yeah, auditions for performances and job interviews to teach. Do you have any tips for me?
Keep going to them.
Yeah.
And bring some Kleenex for when it doesn't go as well as we would like.
Yeah.
No, seriously. So keep going to them and to connect with the people who are doing the work, go to the intensives, you know, be part of the conversation. Just stay in the world and keep doing that work. I mean, you never know, right? You just never know when that moment will happen, when it will work or turn out or change. So, I mean, it's part of that lonely thing is you have to just keep, But, you know, the audition notices are posted, depending on the kind of work you want to do. Maybe audition for one of the larger companies, keep doing project work in New York. You know, you never know when you'll be seen.
Yeah. And you know, as any kind of job interview, the more you go on, the more practiced you become. And also, I think it's important to know your rights. If you feel you're being discriminated against, and I'm not the person to inform you on this, there are people with expertise in this area, know what your rights are, and if you feel that you're not being given an opportunity because they are discriminating against you, or they're asking questions that they have no right to ask, you need to know that so that you can let them know that it's inappropriate.
Yeah, I don't think I know the questions they're not supposed to ask.
Yeah, and as I said, I don't feel qualified to advise you on that, but there are people that will, possibly well, you're not here anymore at Barnard, but I would think that the Office of Disability Services should be able to prepare students for job interviews and let them know what their rights are vis-a-vis that.
I wish I had a magic answer, but I think you have to keep pounding on the doors and showing up, you know, and find ways to do research so you know if you're completely barking up the wrong tree. You know.
I thought I saw a hand in the back. Oh, you have a mic. Go ahead.
Hello. So at the beginning, you know, we were talking about fear, and one of the fears was that people are afraid that they were going to end up just with disability, right? That was
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand.
one of the things you mentioned in the beginning with reference to disability was this fear that people have that was built in, and you said you framed it in such a way that it had to do with whether or not that was their future, as it were. So my question is, it's sort of like, it's an identity politics question, and the reason I thought of it was that there was a lot of language of us and them. Mm-hmm. And my question is that, that kind of identity politics, I want to ask you about what you think about it, but also that since dance creates its own context, and it may change the way that if there are distinctions between us and them, there might not be, it might be a continuum. Does dance change the way that we think about who is or who isn't, and should we even be thinking that way, especially in the context of dance? And the reason that I get there is not only the us-them identity politics language, but also that, many people it's possible, become quote-unquote disabled in the context of dance, which they wouldn't be considered on the subway. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you whether that's relevant and whether we should be thinking, from your point of view, in the context of identity politics, us and them, or if you want it to be in a continuum way, and if that continuum way is determined in part by the fact that we're talking about dance.
I think
That's such an excellent question.
Yeah. It's a complicated question. I'll give a brief response and then turn it over to others. If disability marks you, then claim it. In other words, if disability sets you apart or results in your being treated differently, then claim it, because in that context and in that situation you have a right to. I don't believe in a continuum. I believe that sometimes definitions and identity are context dependent, but what I think we aim for is a consistency of identity and not claiming it when it's convenient. Let's put it that way. But please.
I think we're going to get 3 different answers on this one, but maybe not disagreeing or... So I don't want to police who identifies as disabled, regardless of impairment or degree of impairment. I think you can identify as disabled. That's your choice. I like Judy's language. You come to things when you come to them, how you come to them. But I do want to say there is a big difference between not being able to bend as far backwards when you're in the dance studio, which might render you effectively disabled as a dancer, and having to live a disabled life outside of the dance studio, where you're experiencing daily discrimination around employment, housing, healthcare. There's the not being able to bend backwards, not being able to get your oversplit anymore. May or may not be related to an impairment that you could use to identify as disabled, but the sheer fact of it doesn't necessarily match up, run concurrent with living a disabled life outside the studio.
Yeah, I do like the idea of a continuum. That would be wonderful if we had this idea of continuum on a lot of different levels. And I don't think we're there yet. Mm-hmm. So. And I think disability is also something that, you kind of have to take on the identity of, because there are disabled people who I would consider disabled and they don't consider themselves disabled, right. Even though it does affect, their life outside of a dance studio or something like that. So, that's just, in the way that, I'm happy to identify as a lesbian, but other people aren't. So we have to be able to kind of claim our own identities still, I think. Mm-hmm. And if, we got to the point where it was just all a continuum and, there weren't a need for labels, well, I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime. It will be nice if it does happen. Mm-hmm. And then we don't have to say disabled dancer. Somebody's just a dancer. Mm. So.
Yeah, I don't think we're there yet. Well, I'm getting signals. right? Yeah, I'm definitely getting
The
signals.
hook is cutting out.
And we will be here for a while, so we are glad to talk with you. Thank you all very much for coming. And Lane, some closing words?
Just very briefly, that does bring our event this evening to a close, but we invite you to stay with us for a brief reception that will be in Studio 306, which is to your right and down the hallway as you exit to continue the conversation that was begun this evening. We have the space until 9:30, or until 9:15, sorry. Please join me, though, now in thanking Simi, Alice, and Judith. I hope you're taking it in, because it means, thank you. We know that creating pathways to move disabled artists forward so disabled artists flourish is going to require all of us. We invite you to continue with us. Please continue to visit Dance NYC's website, dance.nyc, for our research, our programming, our online resources. We invite you to become a registered user, to share your own activity with us. Soon, as was mentioned, we will be announcing the grantees of a new Disability Dance Artistry Fund. Yes. And yes, we will continue to convene the field around disability matters. Please join us for our symposium on March 5th, 2017. You can register now at dance.nyc. And then finally, please help us improve our events. You may have received a survey when you entered. The survey is also available online at dance.nyc/DDA survey. And volunteers have baskets outside to collect your surveys as you go. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you for all you do and will do to advance disability dance artistry. And good evening. Thank you.